only way to close that will be through additional revenue or funding. As we talk with you about that gap, we will not be, as staff, and this is through my directive, not be saying what is in a gap and what is not in a gap. And what I mean by that is we have many new investments outside of the pay increase, which is something that is fully funded, but the many other considerations of new investments we're going to be sharing as a part of the overall funding gap. We're not isolating it to specific items that make up $2.7 million. Should we not receive the funding that we need to close that gap, what our plan would be to then work with the school board to prioritize and determine how we will address that at that time. Other than that, I'll turn it back over to Ms. Shelley. Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Baker. So 2.0, preliminary highlights. Ms. Gaines?
Okay, thank you so much. Before we get started, I do want to make sure that everyone has a copy of your superintendent's budget booklet. We're going to actually start on page 23. And then we also want to make sure that you have a copy of the handouts. Today's work session will be a true work session looking at handouts. When we come back together February the 2nd, we'll do a PowerPoint. But the main purpose today is to respond to any questions that you've asked thus far. So if you look at page 23, you will recall when the superintendent and I presented his budget on January the 20th. The total budget you see here, if you look at FY16 recommended, 288.9. When you back out CIP, the number is 270.2. And when you compare that to where we were last year, it is only an increase of $200,000. Basically, the state funding is about the same. The federal funds did increase almost $700,000 when you look at your variance column. That is primarily Title I and Title 6B. When you look at county funds, you basically see that number being the same. That is because the county administrator does not present his budget until February the 10th, and we'll all be present to hear that. When you look at other funds, you basically see that increase, but that is primarily the gap. And then when you look at loans and bonds, that going up by 10.9. So if I can draw your attention now to your handouts, the first handout that you will see is a document which is a one-page summary. And I'll walk you through the columns. It says fund transfer and enrollment trend data, adopted revenues. It's a one-pager. We start off in fiscal year 2000 and we go all the way through 2015. 2016 is not included because we're not there just yet. When you look at the next column, it's transfer from county to schools. The county transfer to the schools, whatever that increase or decrease was. The county transfer to schools percent increase or decrease. And then it talks about what the county general fund numbers were. Their increase or decrease, dollar amount, and then percent. And then what is our percent of the county's general fund? And then we add an additional column just to show you the student enrollment. So some of the highlights that we want to share. If you look back in 2000, the county transfer amount to the schools was $64.6 million. That did represent 66.6% of the county's budget, which was $106,510. Back then, our student enrollment, 18,181. Then I want to draw your attention, when you look at 2015, the budget that we're currently in, we have 116.4. The county transfer to us was 1.6. That increase was 1.38. For this particular year, the county's revenue was 232.6, and the total revenue that they came in increase was 6.5. And now the percent of the county's revenue that is given to the schools is 50.6%, 50.06%. So this percent has actually declined by 10%. So we just want you to be familiar with that. The next piece on the agenda, we wanted to share with you a 3-year revenue trend. So that's your next page in your handout. We start off with FY16 being our base. And when you look at the report, it's a one-pager. The first two sections, we look at the expenditures by category. Then we look at the expenses by object. Then you look at revenue projections. And then at the bottom of the report, you will see the assumptions that staff is using. The first assumption that we want to share is that for 17, 18, and 19, we do include a projected pay raise of 3%. The other thing I want to point out is when you look at the state revenues, we're basically saying it's based on projected enrollment, based on our ADM, which is based on enrollment. For the state funding, we're not making any adjustments for the composite index for the next biennium. We are saying that federal funds will increase by 4.8% for 16, but remain steady for 17, 18, and 19. Other funds will begin to decrease just based on trends that we're seeing. The VRS rate did go down for the professional group. For 17, we're estimating that that will increase by 13% and remain steady for 18 and 19. For sales tax, we're projecting that that will go up by 3%, 17, 18, and 19. Electricity, for the most part, will go up by 5%. We do have a rate increase coming actually this year, come April 2015, so we'll keep our eyes on that. The other items are basically increases or decreases in our non-comp account. And again, we are assuming that the county transfer will remain the same. So when you look here at the report, instruction, you'll basically see that trend going from 178.8 up to 195.7. The main thing driving that number is the increase of the COLA, increases in health insurance, increase in VRS. We are not assuming increases in any particular teaching position or staff positions, so we want you to be familiar with that. So if you look at the bottom line for FY16, right now we have a gap of 2.7. If you go across for FY17, assuming that that gap is going to be resolved, we have a gap of $8.8 million. So the reason why that's important, whatever decisions we make in 16 does have a direct impact on your out years. We also want to make sure we keep in mind that we want to minimize the risk of taking one-time funds and using those for reoccurring expenses. Also, if you look at 18, we see a gap there of 7.3. What's actually driving both of those are increases in debt service, because now that we borrowed additional monies, we defer projects so long, when you go out and borrow those funds, you now have to begin to pay back that debt service. The good thing about 19, we start to see a decline in debt service. So because old debt is starting to retire. So again, here, the bottom line is that when you look at where we are, we have a 3-year forecast. Normally that 3% increase is about 4.9. So that does make up most of your gap. The second component of your gap will be the increases in debt service, then health insurance, and then VRS. So any questions there on our projections?
Madam Chair. Mrs. Gaines, on the state funds, is anything taken into account for the re-benchmarking of the SOQ?
Not yet, no.
Because that occurs every biennium, so I didn't know if there could be any way of estimating the impact that would have on like FY 17.
This is first year, and 19.
17 and 18, right?
Correct. So for this here, all we did was to include our projected ADM, but no benchmarking, also no composite index, because we're just not sure. Once we get that data, we will update it for 17. We'll also have data that we can update for 18. So we just thought it would be too risky to estimate at this point in time.
Okay.
Yes.
If you were to look at buying power, we have a level income from the city county of 116 4 years in a row. But if you look at 18 or 19 or 17, it's not buying the same amount of things. What number are you using? How would you go about representing that? Because this misleads us to think, oh, we got just as much as we used to have, and we don't.
You do not, and you're absolutely correct. You have to take into account inflation, which is going up. I don't have a particular dollar amount, but your buying power definitely is less. You're not getting the same amount of goods for 116.4 as you would have gotten previous years. That is correct.
What percentage, what would you use, 2%?
I was going to say 2%.
Yeah.
Yes. I would say 2%. I would tie it back to inflation.
Yeah.
So if you're looking at 2%, you're basically looking at about 2 million. Yeah.
Ms. Gaines, in terms of maintenance and transportation, I'm not sure, I assume this would come under transportation, is gas costs. What factor do we use in determining gas costs, and how conservative were we with our projection?
I would say for FY16, we did reduce it by 200,000. I would say at this point in time, we feel comfortable with that, but we don't know what's going to happen in 17 because this is a very volatile area. We are projecting a 1% increase. So I would say we are not being as conservative as we have been in previous years. Does that answer your question? Okay.
Any more questions? Okay, Ms. Gaines, continue, please.
Okay. So now that we've looked at revenue, what I want to do is, if you look in your booklets, let's go to page 18. This is one of the questions that was raised by one of the board members. And right before we get to ERIP, I want to kind of share with you what are some of the associated costs. So if you look at page 18, I also want you to look in your handout packet, and right behind your 3-year forecast, you'll see an ERIP policy that we want to share with you, but also we want to share with you some responses to your school board questions. Question number 1 was, if we look at page 18, what are some of the associated costs? And so what I'll do, I'll go through some of the high-level costs, and then we'll go back to the budget book, and each department head today will walk through their specific requests, instruction, admin, etc. So let's look at page 18. The 3% compensation increase, according to your documentation, across the board, this is costing us $4.9 million. We do want you to keep in mind, this is for 16. Under the direction of Dr. Baker, he is having us for 17 to develop a long-term compensation strategy plan. And what I mean by that is looking at where we are, knowing that over a multi-year period, maybe 4 to 5 years, what will be our plan? So we will be looking at all of our different employee category groups to say what will happen in 17 for employee category number 1, what will happen in 18 for employee category number 2. Very comprehensive approach. We also want to compare that back to where we were in prior years. Keep in mind, we do have 113 pay scales. Of those pay scales, 66 are frozen, and that's another justification for why we're moving or recommending a 3% COLA or a COLA in lieu of a step. Because if you were only to give a step, you would have 158 employees who would not receive anything. One other thing we want to bring to your attention is that in looking at our teachers, right now, a 3% pay raise at step 0 would be $40,572. If you were to give a step only, you would be under $40,000 for that step 0. So we know we don't want to have a brand new teacher making the same amount of a teacher who's been with us for 1 year. So what staff would have you to consider is to start off step 0 at $40,402. Brand new person coming into the division. Reason why we chose that amount, because right now, if you look at the steps between 0 and 7, you only have maybe a 0.5 increase. When you get to step 13, up to step 36, that's when you begin to see an incremental increase of 2.5%. Also in Dr. Baker's long-term compensation strategy, he's asking staff to focus on those beginning steps, because that is where we really are our weakest, and that's where you have your most vulnerability when you have staff that are actually leaving you. So what he's asked me to do is to go back over a 10-year period to see where we were and then where we need to go. And so that's something that we're currently working on to get ready for FY17. So that's the 3%. When you look at no health rate increase for employees, they did have an increase this year of 1%. The school board had an increase of 2%. So what we're looking to do is that because we've been able to build up a reserve, because we have been funding at the fully insured rate, we're working right now with our health consultant. We're under bid. The county and the schools did issue an RFP almost 6 months ago. We're now in the negotiation phase, whereby as we negotiate with them, we've come up with billed rates. So for FY16, we would be paying 2.775 less. And we feel comfortable paying that amount less because of what our trends have looked like. But right now, we're in the negotiation phase, and we can't share any additional information. But what will happen is once we finish the negotiations, when you approve your budget on February the 9th, we'll bring a recommendation for the vendor to be approved and the rates. So it all will be tied in. When you look at the VRS rate on your question sheet, we're saving $415, and that's because the professional group is going down from 14.5 to 14.15. That is something that was included in the governor's proposed budget. So we, as well as other school districts, are taking advantage of that. I won't talk about the teaching positions because Ms. Flanard will cover that when she gets to her section. I just want to kind of cover some of the overarching. When you look at the 5% stipend, you will remember staff brought back to you several studies that were completed. Based on that, even with restoring the 10% this year, 5% for 16, we're still not restoring the academic as well as the athletic stipends back to the total amount. They were totally reduced by 20%. So to make them whole, if you agree with the 5%, the following year, well, systematically, we would have to add another probably 7%. So again, we feel confident making this recommendation to bring it back up to 5% because it brings us more in alignment with other school districts. So we want to be competitive. And we do believe that there are advantages for our coaches when they are teachers and they're working with our students because they already have that relationship, so that there are some benefits. In terms of the substitute rates, in doing those studies, there were certain fees that we did recommend that we go back up. Let me give you some examples. The non-degree substitute teacher, we were at $60. Staff is recommending $65. When doing that, that does put us ahead. Before we were 8 out of 9, it now makes us 6 out of 9. So we do gain some advantage. If you look at the degree substitute, right now we're at $70. If we bring that to 80, we were at 9, it kind of brings us up to 6. So again, you can see how we're becoming more competitive. The non-degreed or non-certified long-term assignment, currently, we're at 110. By bringing that up to 120, we still say about the same. We were at 8, and we still are kind of low. Don't gain a lot of advantage, but we don't fall behind even further. The next one is the degree substitute teachers. Right now, we're at 165. We're recommending that we come up to 170. We were at about 6 or 7. This brings us up to 5 out of 9. So again, we're making ourselves more competitive. That's long-term substitutes, correct, yes. The other one is the substitute for paras. If you look at their daily rate, right now they're at $55. Staff is recommending that we bring that up to $60. When doing so, we were at about a range of 6 to 7. That brings us up to 5. If you look at the other one, which dealt with our bus aides, we were at $8.09. We're recommending that we come up to $9.50. We were at 8. It brings us up to 7. Still not as competitive, but we did gain at least one additional advantage. I believe those were the main ones. So I wanted to cover that high level, so when Ms. Flanard walks through instruction, I will have already covered those, and she can focus on the teaching positions. When you look at reducing the athletic fee, you'll basically see there, that was revenue that we gave up. Also, when you look at the 100% of parking permit fees, currently we charge $80 per permit. When charging that fee at the end of the year, high schools were required to give us back like 20% of that, $20 of that. And so what we're now saying, those parking fees in totality will now remain at the high school level. And that means that we're losing about $30,000. So again, we thought that was good, so that can assist them with other needs that they have at the high school level.
What was our income for the athletic fees at 100?
At 100, we were bringing in, when they gave us the $20, it was $30,000.
$30,000.
Yeah, it's not a lot of money, but this is a request. They did come through one of our school board members, as well as working with the athletic task force that Mr. Wolf and Mrs. Daniels oversee.
So when it was at $100, we
No,
took...
$80. $80 is what they charge for the parking permit.
No, I'm talking about the athletic fees.
Oh, athletic fee, I'm sorry.
How much?
So when you look at the athletic fee, there were actually two numbers a part of that one, Mr. Blaine. One is lost revenues of $87,000, but we also had about $33,000 where our budget exceeded what we were actually collecting. So when you look in terms of actual revenues being lost, it's about $87,000.
Okay, I just kind of wanted a sense for
Okay,
what was
sure.
I'd just like to add for the board one of the pieces that Ms. Gaines was talking about, and just as a reminder to put it back into context regarding the activity fee or the athletic fee. This is not an attempt to just arbitrarily begin to reduce it, but there were two key factors that we mentioned in the presentation. One, that our research had shown us that we were one of only a few school districts in the state that right now is known for charging to participate in athletics. So that's right now a dubious distinction. The second part was of the school divisions that we had surveyed that do require the fee, ours was at the top. And so those were two key factors in the consideration. And I also want to commend our finance staff and our whole cabinet team in working with the athletic council, the athletic task force. They had looked carefully at how can we continue to provide internally through reallocations or different uses of funds, ways to keep their athletic program strong and solvent and not have to go back, at some point. And I think looking at the parking fees was a way to provide more internal funding for the schools so that they're able to sustain this with the loss, the gradual loss. So this is that phase-out approach that we're going to attempt to do over a period of years. So just wanted to, again, bring that back, that this is not just something that we decided to do willy-nilly, but something we've been looking at over time.
Any more questions or comments? Ms. Gaines?
Okay. As we continue on page 18, I want to draw your attention to the Affordable Care Act. In your book on page 15, we do provide you with a detailed explanation. But what this basically is, we are required now to offer insurance for FY16 for those employees who are considered to be full-time. The full-time definition is anyone who works on average 30 hours per week. So with that being said, for FY16, while we currently offer 3 plans, we will be offering, if you approve, a bronze plan. So in our negotiations with our vendor, they will be providing us with a plan design as well as the premiums. We are required to offer, not pay for it. So the full premium will be paid by those individuals. So the $225 basically says, of the 3,600 employees who now will be determined full-time, based on this new definition, we could potentially have 75 employees who go to the exchange and say that the benefit is not affordable. If so, we have to pay a fee. The amount of the fee that we would have to pay would be $3,000 per person. That's how we come up with the fee of $225. If you do not offer the plan, the cost would be much higher. You would be basically looking at us paying almost $7 million because you would have to take all full-time employees, 3,600, and you will multiply that times 2,000. So we believe it's cheaper to pay the penalty if it's not affordable than not to offer it. So we just want to make sure you know that. Initially, when you looked at your budget for 15, you did have a portion of that in there, but in working with, I guess, President Obama, he made a determination to defer that for a year to allow employees to prepare. So with that being said, that's where we are. In looking at the next item on the list is the lower employer health insurance expense. That's where we're working currently with our vendor to negotiate that our lower bill rate will be about $2.8 million less. What we're paying this year is $34 million. FY16, it will look more like $31 million. Okay, any questions there on the health insurance? So that brings us to projected ERIP savings. In your packet, you do have some guidelines that were shared by the HR department. Initially, finance was responsible for doing the surveys, doing the cost analysis. Now that we're in the actual plan that has been approved by the school board, it is HR's responsibility to execute the plan. The only thing that I want to bring to your attention, because you will be looking at this tonight at 6:30, is based on additional feedback since your approval of the plan on January the 10th, and hearing from our employees, what they're saying is that they may not have 15 years of VRS because maybe they worked in North Carolina, maybe they worked in Georgia. So what we're saying is that in order to qualify for the program, you will have at least 15 years of VRS experience or 15 years of educational experience. This is no different from what we did with our ROP program in 2009, 10, and 11. It's no different what other school districts do. So that's the only additional language that we're adding that we wanted to share with you today.
Ms. Gaines,
Yes.
question though, is there any minimum for VRS to be able to collect VRS though?
Okay, so what we're saying in our plan is that in order to participate, you have to be VRS eligible. VRS has two plans, Plan 1 and Plan 2. Their requirements are such: in order to retire under Plan 1, you must be age 50 with 10 years or age 55 with 5 years. In order to retire under Plan 2, you must be at least age 60 with 5 years. We can be more restrictive than VRS, but not more lenient. So in 2007, in order to reduce our OPEB liability, GASB 45, the school board said in order to get retirement, in order to get health insurance, you must be with us for 15 years. And that is very helpful because our health insurance costs began to rise at an amount that was not sustainable.
Madam Chair, could I ask a question on that? With reading through these stipulations or the requirements, does it require the individual to work up to June 30th, or does it take into consideration the possibility of an employee, say, retiring mid-year and then wanting to receive the benefit?
Based on the data that we prepared, our goal is to say you will work through your contract year. So for example, for a teacher, that's not June 30th, but whatever that contract period is. So you're going to work through June. But you could leave earlier than June 30th if your contract ends like June 15th. Yes.
Thank you.
You're welcome.
Related to that, if I may,
Sure.
let's assume I'm a teacher and I know that I have X number of sick days or personal days available. Could I work till April 1st and use personal days to extend to the end of that school year to qualify for the employee?
I'm going to say legally, absolutely, but I hope that person will work very closely with their principal,
Yeah,
just to make sure, absolutely.
I think most people would, but
Yeah. But a lot of them don't, Mr. Blaine, because when they retire, if you've been a full-time, you do receive $30 for each leave not used in terms of their sick leave days. So some of them do work the full period.
And the other question I had, from what I've heard, is there some form of adjudication for mitigating circumstances that we already have in place for exceptional or some, I guess, some mitigating circumstances that kind of fall outside of the boundaries that we've, or the guidelines that we set? Do we have some way of adjudicating that? You know, if so, what is the procedure? And I don't know if that's an answer for you or if not for Dr. Baker.
I think the main part of the criteria that was established that provides for some flexibility has to do with the 15 years of VRS or educational experience. So I think that, as we've said before, the dual purpose of this ERIP program is to, one, develop, create some internal budget capacity. And if we cease to do that, then we probably wouldn't be doing it. So we have to keep that as a key ingredient. The second part is to match employee intent with this opportunity. So not so much as a buyout, but as an opportunity for many of our folks, loyal employees, loyal to public education, who are seeking retirement in the near future, and that this is a good match for them. So we want to find that balance, but if we begin to go below a certain salary point, then it doesn't end up being a good thing for anyone. So, but that is probably the main provision that enables us to look at some individual circumstances.
Okay, so any other questions on ERIP? Then we'll move forward. So in your binder or your booklet, page 19, all we really want to highlight here is that when you look at Commonwealth Governor School, basically there you just see the COLA being provided. Everyone will take advantage of the VRS reduction. Rappahannock Juvenile Detention Center, you'll see there, we did add that position that is actually, for Fund 2, same thing, just a COLA and the VRS. The food service, I do want to pause on this one for a moment. When you look at the food service program, over the last several years, the amount of money that they actually bring in is about $8.9 million. However, their budget authority has been about $500,000 higher. So when you see that the food service budget is coming down, that is only the appropriation, that's only the budget authority. We still will collect based on our goals that we put in place. If not higher, we will collect the same amount that we've collected in previous years. So we're not losing any revenues. That was a question that was raised by one of the board members in your packet, and that's a very good question. Okay, so here is just budget authority. No dollars are attached to it. Okay, when you look at the regional adult ed program, here you will see that this particular program has a new teacher being added and is fully funded by the grant, so there's no impact on our state or our local funds. When you go over to the next page, which is page 20, you basically see the capital projects. We've already approved that. The school board did back in November. The bond was approved. And then when you look at Fund 7, as we move further along, Dr. Upperco will give you the detailed analysis of that. So what I want you to do now in your booklets, if you can now turn with me to page 24, and what will happen, Mrs. Flanard will review the instructional items that we have not yet shared with you. Then you'll hear from special ed, and we'll go on to page 25. So at this time, I'll turn it over to Mrs. Flanard.
Good evening, Madam Chair, members of the board, Dr. Baker, Dr. Martin, and my colleagues before us this evening. Afternoon, I'm used to evening, I think. We're going to go over a couple of the items in relation to the instruction department, and some of them I know have been presented very well the other evening by Ms. Gaines. We are looking at, I'm not going to go over the COLA or those pieces have already really been discussed. We are talking about the elimination of the SOL stipend position that is currently for individuals at every school, and this came up really with the support of the principals and talking about how this money really could be better allocated, and so really is a reallocation of funds that we're looking in that piece. The creation of middle school debate sponsor, as well as adjusting the high school volleyball assistant coach and adjusting the elementary and middle school special education chair stipends, all came from discussions with the principals themselves, and really to look at some equity pieces and to making sure that things were additionally aligned. Ms. Gaines has already really talked about all of the substitute rates, so I'm going to skip those pieces, as well as the hourly para rates. I'm going to go down to about halfway down the page at the $21,530, the increase of the Office of Teaching and Learning supplemental pay for curriculum writing. Our curriculum is in dire need of really being redesigned, and it was one of the pieces that was really very much on hold during the economic crunch. And so our curriculum and our curriculum development process is very much underway and really does need to continue to be evolved. And we need our folks and our teachers in the summer hours to really work on that, because our teachers are the ones that are using our curriculum day in and day out, and it is vital to have them as part of the process to help design what it is that they need. In continuing down the page, 3 FTEs for ESOL teaching positions. Our ESOL numbers to date are 1194. We have 1,194 students as of right now in our ELL program. That is higher than we ended last year with. The other interesting piece in that 1194 is that our students are coming at a significantly older age. So they may be coming as non-English speakers to the high school, and they are required to graduate on time with the English speakers. So our needs are great in this world. And so we also have our ELL students are also supported by Title III, and our Title III grant, we are in year 4 actually of not meeting the requirements for that grant. The area that we are not continuously meeting is proficiency. So in other words, our ELL students are required to be proficient in the English language, and that is the one that is holding us up the most. And so additional teachers can help support our need in that area. Our current ratio is about 1 to 66 students.
On time, you mean if they come in as sophomores, that they will graduate 3 years?
That is correct. They're required to have the same amount of credits as well as pass SOL tests as our English-speaking students.
And we give SOLs in every language?
No, sir. They would be required to pass the English
Must be in
SOL
English.
test.
So a high school student coming with no English would still be expected to pass an SOL in English 3 years later
That's correct.
in order to...
Actually, by the time they graduate, they would have to pass that SOL English test.
Yeah. Okay.
Ms. Lenard, with the ESOL, when you say proficient, how long does the student have to become what the feds call proficient?
Thank you. That is a great question. And they take what is called a WIDA test, is W-I-D-A, and that WIDA test actually determines their proficiency level. And we certainly have a range of students that have different levels 1 through 5. And so they have a very short window, which is why I believe that Ms. Shelley is asking that question. And they are tested every single year. And we hope to exit students every single year. And so we are graded, if you will, on the Title III grant, on the number of students that we exit that program. And that is not unique to us. Spotsylvania County is in very much alignment with divisions across Virginia as struggling in the proficiency area. Sure.
If I can Just one
Sorry?
moment, Carol. I just want to point out to all board members, because I see you writing notes as Carol is speaking, you do have in your packet a legal size document that gives you all the justification for your positions, and then that way you can follow along as well.
Thank you, Mrs. Gaines.
Okay.
Ms. Leonard. Oh, wait, we have
Thank
another
you.
question. Mr. Braswell.
This question is, obviously, I see, teaching positions that we've looked at, trying to bring back and with full-time equivalents. How are we doing in terms of counselors and counselor support? How are we doing in terms of incrementally bringing them back to a point where we're going to, obviously, it shows that we're having more students that are going to be enrolled or projected to be enrolled. And of course, in order for kids to do well, they also need good guidance. So where are we at in that? Just share with me.
Absolutely, and thank you for that question, because I do believe that while it's not just me, research does show that mental health capacity is a key component to not just student achievement, but to success in life. So thank you for that question. We have, when we looked at the whole approach to the mental health capacity, we looked at the school social workers, the school psychologists, and the counselors as well, as a group and individually and collectively. And our counselors are faring the best in regards to those three areas, meaning that our student ratio for counselors is the greatest compared to the school psychologists and the school social workers. Those three collectively really do support student needs, which is why before you have an increase in the social worker and the school psychologist. That certainly does not mean that counselors are not needed, they are. But when we looked at the three, we went ahead with the school social worker and the psychologist first, because their ratios are even greater than the counselors are at this time. But we do certainly look to have a need of those in the future.
Yeah, I'd just like to follow up, and I agree with you, you have instructional positions that are the main effort, and of course, they're supporting efforts. And I would just, over the next several years, look at not just what we're doing in terms of getting counselors back into the school, but counseling support, because there's an awful lot of work that's being done, I'm sure, by our people. And when you can always cut fat, but when you start cutting into bone, then you really don't have any muscle left. So I just want us to just continue to keep our eye on that.
Absolutely. Thank you for pointing that out. Is very much appreciated. In regards to there are 9 FTE general education teachers, and then two rows down, there's 12 FTE teachers. I'm going to lump them together a little bit so that you can talk about 21 general education teachers. And what those 21 positions are, they are 2 math teachers for the middle school level, and I am very much going off the legal size sheet that Ms. Gaines has referenced earlier. The math teachers at the middle school level are really in an effort to support the instructional practices at the middle school level. If you look at the schools that are currently in a warning status at middle school, it is in the area of mathematics. And additional math teachers would not only support our movement in curriculum, but would support the instructional practices at the middle school level as well. And if you continue down further on that page, you have 7 additional middle school teachers. Currently, we have middle school teachers in the area of gifted and in the area of reading resource. Our reading specialists are both teachers of record. In other words, they are teaching in their other licensed area. So, for example, if you are a reading resource teacher, a reading specialist, you are probably endorsed in English, and so you are teaching English classes instead of being able to be a reading specialist for our students that are struggling in reading. Or on the other end, if you are a gifted resource teacher and happen to be endorsed in science, then you're teaching science classes instead of in collaborative as well as supplement services for our gifted. If we add these 7 additional teachers, we would be able to enhance both the reading specialist program as well as the gifted program at the middle school level. And then there are 12 additional general education teaching positions. Those 12 positions would be targeted at the elementary and high school level. And those would be for Mr. Wolf and I to see the greatest area of need and then go ahead and look at adding additional positions at both the elementary and high school level, as I noted earlier. There are also in case that Mr. Uppercoat tells me that we are going to get additional children. And so if we had additional 12 positions, it may support that as well. Right.
Ms. Flennard, can we also, just as another piece to that, we're looking at the most recent accountability data as well, the achievement data, and I know that at our focus on K-12 literacy, I think that we want to be able to strategically place positions based on reviews, consistent reviews of that data, but also at the earliest grades possible to help close literacy gaps early on before they widen and before the demands and the rigors of secondary education come in. I think the other thing that's important to note is that, and I think the board's probably well aware of this, by no means are these increases in teaching staff even close to keeping up with projected enrollment increases over the next several years. But we are cautiously optimistic that when you've seen the charts, that we are not going to realize that many additional students in a given year. But it is important to note that we're not right now keeping up with those enrollment changes. We're just trying to, at a bare bones level, be able to target and meet needs as we go forward.
Okay, thank you. Excuse me. The $10,765 is an increase in supplemental pay for our ESOL services, and that is due to the additional need of interpreters, and that goes directly back to the increase of ELL students. Therefore, we need to supplement the interpreters so that we can have proper communication with our families.
Ms. Flennard, do we have a number of how many different languages we have here in Spotsylvania County?
Thank you. We obviously, our greatest is Spanish. However, we do have well over 200 different languages that are spoken in Spotsylvania County Public Schools.
Are there interpreters for all 200 of those languages?
No, ma'am, there is not.
Thank you.
We do use technology quite a bit as necessary. It is just not exact, as there are many dialects within languages.
Ms. Flennard, you were covering the 12 teaching positions, and slightly under that is an instructional director position. Can you elaborate a little bit more on that?
Yes, sir. I was actually going to hit that one next.
Oh, okay.
Sure, I'll elaborate on that. Over the last several years, I think that the board is well aware that when we restructured our instructional department and our model, we did that with an eye on the future. One of the things that I'll be very candid that I would not have foreseen, I alluded to this in my budget presentation, that I would not have been able to envision when we are coming out of the grips of the Great Recession that we would be facing accountability standards and more rigorous assessments than we've ever faced. And so given that, what we're finding as we receive state support along with the majority of school divisions and many schools throughout the Commonwealth, we're finding that our resources that are already fairly lean, that are primarily here to be directed towards schools, to support schools in the day in, day out instructional program and supervision, are being tied up to help support the state's support. And so that has made me, as superintendent, take a step back and say, our folks need to be supporting the day in, day out main business of education as opposed to various compliance exercises. So the purpose, one of the positions that had been here a few years ago that was reduced was the elementary school level director. And so those, what was at one time 3 different positions was subsumed into, really 4 positions was subsumed into 2. And I think we've been able to do fine, but with the increasing accountability mandates and the need to interface with the state on a weekly, sometimes daily basis, I need our folks to be accessible to their schools, to the communities, and if nothing else, an additional director to help oversee the instructional program would be able to, I guess the best way to put it is we're sharing the wealth, and to have an additional person to help do that, and in essence, take more off the backs, not only of the folks working to support the schools, but the schools themselves.
And Dr. Baker, I'd just like to follow up, in the way it was done in the past, and how you envision using this person in the future, what is the significant difference?
I think one of the ways that we've shifted is in terms of our instructional program being more site-based with leadership and guidance coming from the school division level. I would say, as opposed to this instructional director being tell me what to do, it becomes this person providing additional support to what is already being done. It's a slight distinction, but I also think a key part of it for us is I mentioned literacy at the early levels. And while we have folks working with curriculum K-12, I think that literacy at the early grades is critical to our success throughout the school division, and the students go through all the different levels. So we are looking for someone to help oversee those literacy initiatives, not only at the elementary level, but even the pre-K level. So that would be a slight change.
Okay. Thank you, Dr. Baker. The 500,000, the 557 figure that you have for non-compensation, as you can see, there is a litany of items within that non-compensation figure. Some of that is the ESOL 15,000, IB 86,000. It's actually been shortened a little bit. I do want to just let the board know that IB alone is not 86,000. It's actually AB and AP training. So there's some professional learning training that's needed across all high schools. So that's what makes that figure, because it does look a little bit like IB would be 86, but we would have really long paragraphs on all of these things. So we condensed them a little bit. Continuing our pool contract, professional learning in the area of 100,000, that is a large figure, but really what we're looking at is creating a model of teaching and learning frameworks so that we can provide professional learning for our teachers to make sure that we have tenets of instruction that are going throughout the Commonwealth of Spotsylvania, and that way, whether you are teaching in one school versus another school, we have, this is Spotsylvania's way. And we really are looking at developing lots of committees of teachers to help build what that should look like, so that our teachers are a big part of that professional learning. But that is what professional learning for that large figure. And I do want to say that the 100,000 for our size division would not complete the professional learning that all of our teachers would need.
I also want to draw the board's attention, and Ms. Gaines can follow up on this if I miss anything, but when you look at those general non-compensation areas, they go across the spectrum. I think that over the last several years, one thing that used to be a necessity has now become, in the eyes of many, a luxury, which is ongoing job-embedded professional development.
Okay.
And so there's 4 key pieces when we're looking at professional development that I think are the primary reasons that we have this in here. One is time. We need to have the time set aside, and we can work with that a little bit. We need the resources, and sometimes we do not have the resources to provide that training. The other is the quality. And so in terms of the types of professional development or professional learning you can provide, you can do it very inexpensively, but then the question is it quality? Is it going to is it going to manifest itself in the daily work and what we deliver to students? And then the last part is sustainability. Several things throughout that non-compensation piece are things that on an annual basis we're trying to tackle with either carryover funding or one-time funds that we don't believe is good for being productive in the future. We're basically trying to handle those things on the fly in a reactive way versus being proactive and saying we need to be ready to do those things annually to build our organization. The other thing is that we continually have reductions in places that we didn't anticipate, such as the E-rate funding. And so when we get reduced in an area that we've been counting on, we need to find another sustainable source in order to be able to continue many of the things that we've been doing. So I just wanted to kind of give an overall for that.
Ms. Flannard?
The only other one I wanted to specifically point out is the large amount of money for the assessment, the $220,000. Many of you are aware that we had a reduction in the number of SOL tests that we are taking at the elementary and middle schools specifically. Yet we are required, per the state, to say how our students are performing. So we have to have an assessment in replacing of the assessment that they were giving us. And so the 220 is an annual contract that we are hoping becomes part of the budget, which, as Dr. Baker alluded to, we were really doing with some additional funds from the end of the year. But that is really for interactive achievement so that we are able to meet the state's requirement of turning in how our students are doing in the SOLs that are no longer given in May.
Thank you. Any questions? Okay.
And I believe that's the end of my areas.
Madam Chair, could I, before I forget it, you may have covered this, but I didn't pick it up. The E-Lab, was that?
Sorry, I did not. eLab is we are looking at expanding our eLab program. We are looking at the possibility, particularly last year with our weather situation, we're looking at how we are looking at time and if we can move towards offering school and what does it really mean to be present at school. And if we are looking at expanding our eLab opportunities, our online opportunities, then we can have our students participating in school at various times and not necessarily during our, what we would call our typical calendar time. So we're looking at expanding opportunities. Visionary-wise, we're looking at middle schools. We have not really ventured out on enough of online opportunities at the middle school level as well as the elementary level. So the 25,000 really is just starting to look at some other visionary opportunities that we would be able to offer our students.
And your following one is the LLE. I was trying to figure the alphabet soup.
That's a very good point. Thank you, Dr. Meyer. LLE is the name, actually, of the training that occurs for our administrative staff that many of the board attends at the end of the year. But really, we have an opportunity also embedded in that is we have an opportunity for the National Learning Forward Professional Learning Conference is actually this year very, very close to us, and so we would be looking to possibly, with school site support as well, sending some administrators and some teacher leaders to the Learning Forward Conference that is, I believe, right in Baltimore. Or DC, it's DC.
Okay, I'm a senior moment in the alphabet soup that we have for our behavior intervention program that we have at many of the schools, but not all of the schools. Is there any funding required to complete the installation or the training in the remaining schools?
I believe you may be referring to PBIS?
Yes.
Okay. Dr. Meyer, we're looking at the expansion of PBIS and looking at within the instruction's current budget to see if we can do some of our own reallocations.
Okay. I knew it required some funding resources.
Yes, sir, it does.
I didn't see that in the alphabet soup, so.
Dr.
No,
Baker?
good observation there. Just for the board, I know that many of you have attended the Leadership Learning Exchange in the past, and I know that I believe it was Mr. Laura who had said he would love to see there be greater access to that quality professional development over time. And so I think continuing to invest in not so much a smorgasbord of different smaller opportunities, but we want to maximize that time in the year and make that conference. It's really our startup summer conference, and a lot of the learning that occurs there really carries over throughout the summer planning into the school year. So I think it is very impactful in terms of what our schools start the year with, as well as what they bring to their students. So that's, as I've talked about professional learning and professional development training, that is one of our key initiatives.
Thank you. Ms. Gaines? Mr. Blaine?
Excuse me, I just wanted to make a couple of comments. One, I'm really happy to see the grant writer. I think that person will more than pay for themselves. Do you have any objectives in terms of anticipation or standards for them? Are you expecting to write 500,000 worth of grants? I'm serious.
I'll handle that question. I think that's a good question as far as how specific are we and concrete are we in terms of exactly how that position will play out. The concept for the position is twofold. One, if you notice our strategic plan, the second objective is all around communications and community engagement, because we can be doing a whole lot of things very well, and if no one knows about it, then is it really happening? It's like a tree falling in the forest, you know. And I think we believe that we need to engage our community, and as part of that, engaging our business community as partners to not only provide intermittent support, but to be able to develop grants around community partnerships, university partnerships, business partnerships. And so the idea is twofold: to help enhance communication, particularly with the community at large, and also to be able to develop grants. And I would say probably the area that we would look at the most are areas such as STEM, areas where we want to bring on a regular basis to more of our schools certain types of learning experiences that are costly to provide, especially if there's before and after school enrichment activities. So we want to be able to expand those opportunities for our students, but also to support materials and supplies and things that go into those for staff. And so it's broad at this point as far as that goes, but if that position is able to ultimately be funded in next year's budget, we would certainly be looking for someone who has exemplary communication skills, both written and oral communication skills, in order to be able to help initiate those partnerships.
Well, I'm really glad to see that innovative approach, frankly, and happy about that. Also, I just wanted to comment, I'm really happy to hear the comments about the importance of the primary grades, and I think I have lots of comments about that at appropriate times, but I think that's important, because if we don't do it there, they don't get as far as high school. A lot of the kids, they're out. Thanks.
Ms. Gaines, I have a question for you, and this might be the million-dollar question. What is the target number that we need to hit in the ERIP to realize the $1.5 million in savings, plus or minus?
Okay. For the plan year, Mr. Braswell, in order for us to hit the 1.5, we would need 40% of the participants, about 174 individuals, to retire, and we would pay them, of course, as you had agreed, the school board, a 30% payout. So 174 is the target number. Those applications are due March 16th. I'm looking at it very closely.
And based off of early rumblings, and I mean, how excited or are employees about what they've heard thus far?
Very excited. We've already started to look at the numbers, and the applications are already starting to come in. I think they're going to get even more excited after tonight when you approve that policy, because that tells them that it's definite. And then HR, working with finance, will be having the first workshop, weather pending, this week, and we have 2 more scheduled. So I think they're excited.
Ms. Flannard, are you continuing?
I believe that section of I'm complete on this page. I see no other instruction items on this
Absolutely.
page.
So if I can draw your attention now to page 25, and what we're going to do, we're going to have Ms. Richardson speak to the request for the Office of Support Services, and she's going to also take you through the first line as it pertains to administrative services, attendance and health, because she does have some positions there. Mrs. Richardson.
Good evening, Madam Chair, members of the board, Dr. Baker and Dr. Martin, and all of my colleagues here. Thank you. The first position on page 25 is that for a school social worker. We currently have 13 staff members that are performing the active duties of school social workers. Our numbers as of Friday to close out the first semester of the 2014-15 school year had us as serving 1,039 students. Of those students served, 498 were considered very intensive cases. The average caseload of our current school social work team is about 61 students per school social worker. You can see it's a large need, as they are the main bridges between our schools and families and our resources that are available to support their mental health needs. Our current staffing of school social workers, our ratio right now is about 1 social worker to 1,500 students. So we know that we need more social workers to meet the ever-growing and changing mental health needs of our student population. For the superintendent's budget advisory, I shared research information from the Centers from Disease Control that said only about 17% of the adult population is functioning at optimal mental health. So we know that we certainly need those additional resources. Our school social work team is continuing to work on wraparound services to meet the mental health needs of our students, as well as the transfer of skills to increase the knowledge and skill set of our classroom teachers and school-based staff so that they can respond and react to mental health situations. The second position that you see is that of a speech therapist. We currently have a staff of approximately 27 speech therapists, and it's important to know that speech language pathology can be a direct standalone service under special education, or it can be a related service. The state has set the staffing standard for speech therapists so that they can case manage no more than 68 students. We currently have some therapists that are serving anywhere from 75 to 83 students. So as our student population has grown for that of students with disabilities, we also need to increase our related services. The next item is 2 early childhood special education teachers and classroom paraeducators. Our current child count for December 1st, 2014 was 2,756 students, and of that, it was 252 preschool students. We serve students from the ages of 2 to 22. And the staffing ratios for ECSC are lower than that of school-aged. So our ECSC teachers can only serve a maximum of 8 students at one given time. So as transportation can certainly tell you, we have some very creative ECSC schedules so that we can serve a maximum of 16 students per day. Let's see, the next line item, there's our 3 FTEs for autism teachers, 1 at elementary, 1 at middle, 1 at high, and of course with paraeducators to support those programs. We have approximately 330 students that are identified in our child count as having autism as a primary disability. That does not capture secondary or tertiary disabilities, nor does it capture how students can present in the educational setting as having other health impairment or a speech language impairment or a developmental delay. So that is a growing area. Here in Spotsylvania, we do a blended model of staffing. So all of our case managers can manage up to 20 points. The point system is set by state regulations, and our point values range from 1 point to 3.3 points. Students with autism that are served in a self-contained model count as 3.3 points, so they can't service 10 students. So our staffing ratio needs to be, lower there so that we can meet the unique needs of that student population. If you drop down, and then you see that the addition of our FTE for the speech therapist is what brings the reduction in non-compensation for purchase services. If you drop down to the next section, which is psychological services, it's line 3, you'll see that we're requesting 2 school psychologists. Our current team is comprised of 9 full-time school psychs, and we have 2 part-time school psychs. Our staffing ratio puts us at about 1 to 2,165 students. On average, we work with about 555 students through the special education evaluation process. Our school psychs team has been working very diligently and very hard, but it does break my heart to say that we have not met the state requirements for indicators 9 and 10 for the past 4 years, which is 100% on-time evaluation of students for special education. And we have not done so because we have not had the staff to meet the growing needs of our student population. Please also note that our school psych team is working very closely with school counselors and school social workers to also broaden their outreach to mental health and working on that transfer of skills to school-based staff. And they're also working to create a service delivery model so that we are truly working with our outside agencies and supporting the needs of our students as they transition back into the educational setting.
Ms. Gaines, I'm sorry. Ms. Richardson, I have a couple of questions.
Sure.
First of all, of these student support positions, I know many of them are federally required. Are any of these in the SOQs?
No, there are no SOQs for special education.
Okay. And for not meeting the timelines for the reevaluations and such, do we have any are there any consequences to Spotsylvania County Schools for not meeting those?
Yes, for the past 3 years, I've had to write a corrective action plan, and we've also had to work on acquiring some support through purchase services. If we continue on this trend, we're at risk of losing funding.
So this is also it's supporting our students, but also an investment for us as well.
Absolutely.
Thank you.
Madam Chair? Oh, go ahead.
I did have one more question. The 20 points per caseload, I know that's a state regulation?
Correct.
Or do we have, I'm just thinking the 1 point people. Do we have staff that have 20 students on their caseload?
Yes, we do, especially at the secondary level.
Okay, thank you.
Ms. Richardson, are any of these positions funded through 6B?
No, they are not.
Available for 6B?
No, they are not.
2 doors just got closed.
Yes, yes.
Ms. Richardson, my question is the autism and autism paraeducators, and I see that you have elementary, middle school, and high school. At glance, you would look at that as maybe one at each, or are you intending to employ them or employ their services at the John J. Wright Cultural Center? What is your envision? How do you envision using them?
Sure. We actually do need one additional elementary program, one additional middle school program, and one additional high school program to be based at comprehensive elementary, middle, and high. This does not include our ever-growing needs out at John J. Wright with our Gateway program at this time. We're looking at our needs on a weekly basis.
I do have one more question. What were our numbers again for, at the December 1 count?
Certainly. At child count, our final count was 2,756 students. Of that, 2,504 were school-aged, so that's ages 5 to 22. 252 were preschool. As of Friday, our child count was 2,798.
And our federal funding is based on that original number for
Correct.
256, and we're 2 months in, and we've gone up 42 students.
Yes.
Thank you.
At this time, Mr. Upperco.
Thank you, Ms. Gaines. Madam Chairman, members of the board, Dr. Baker, Dr. Martin, and colleagues, I'd like to address the additional FTE for a nurse position that you see in that category. For the past several years, the division has had difficulty securing substitute nurses to ensure that each school clinic has been adequately covered on a daily basis. In addition, last school year, a number of nurses themselves, it seemed like the perfect storm, they themselves had some health issues, and that required us to secure long-term substitutes in their absence. During the 2013-2014 school year, there were only 2 days when substitute nurses were not used. So given the increasing number of medically fragile children, which Dr. Smith documents very well every year, the increasing number of students with disabilities that you're hearing about, and the number of students with serious allergies, asthma, and Asperger's, whatnot, it is imperative to ensure that each school is staffed daily with a registered nurse. Consequently, we are proposing that this additional nurse position be a floating nurse. In the absence of the school nurse, the floating nurse would perform the school nurse functions of administering health care service to students and staff, including administering medications and following procedural guidelines. The position would rotate to the school of greatest need as determined by our health services director and nurse practitioner, Dr. Pat Smith. If there were days that no substitute nurses were needed, the floating nurse would assist the director of health services in training, health screenings, and other necessary activities.
Mr. Uppercutt, with this nurse, this salary amount, that would not include now, how would the travel base be worked for this? Because I know when our staff, if they're at one school but they have to go to a different building, then they get mileage. Would this office be that person's main building and then wherever they go, or is it, how is that going to work?
The person would not report to this building. In fact, if they reported to a site, it would be to the nurse practitioner's office, which is located down in Fleet Transportation. So the salary that you're talking about is a level 0 salary with benefits.
Thank you.
And I just thought for some comic relief, we really would like to find a floating nurse. And if we're able to do that, we won't have to worry about the travel expenses.
Mr. Upperco, I think one of the questions that Ms. Shelley was bringing up is, how are we going to fund that person's ability to travel to different schools that have a shortage? Is there going to be transportation provided to her him or her from the county, or is that something that
This would be personal travel. They would not be provided as far as a vehicle. Is that what you're
Yes.
referring to? They would not have a vehicle.
Okay,
A
so
school vehicle.
in other words, they would make the adjustments on their taxes based off of employee mileage with their I guess that would be under Form 2106 with the
That's my
government.
understanding,
Okay.
yes.
Thank you.
If I can also clarify, when you look there for employees who actually travel, based on school board policy, if they submit the reimbursement, we are required to make the payment. There are some other opportunities whereby we can say, if we know in advance, the night before, that a sub is needed at a specific location, that person travels there, there's no mileage reimbursement due, because they'll be at that location the entire day. So we're looking for many opportunities to reduce that cost, Mr. Braswell.
And I think with that, I think the purpose would be to be very proactive with the use of this position if it was allocated, because many times there are ongoing needs at a particular building for a period of time. So I think there might be a rhythm to it more than likely, or a school that as the needs are assessed, that individual is going to be more frequently reporting to that location. I think we would anticipate the need for travel to be infrequent.
You're right. Typically, there are semi-long-term assignments. They could be, Dr. Smith would have to decide which school warranted this person, perhaps, as opposed to just a call-in sick, as opposed to a long-term situation. We've had situations, as you know, in certain schools for a number of days where there may be a pan flu epidemic or something of that nature that requires an immediate assistance. And so those buildings would get priority. And the beauty of this is it is flexible, and it would be determined by need. So.
Okay. Ms. Daniels, I believe you're next.
Okay, I know we already touched on this earlier, but I just want to reiterate that the public information communication specialist grant writer position would be to provide support for grant writing. Essentially, it'll pay for itself because of the income that we're going to be generating working with our business community. So that is what that is for. The second one, that is a net increase of $9,405, is for various items within the public information department, specifically to cover content subscription. Again, it's helping with that communication. It's actually parent communication. It's tips for parents to help support them with providing success resources for them to work with their child at home. And so I'll be posting those on the website as well as the Facebook page, and have like a daily tip for parents.
Mr. Laura.
As all of you know, I'm going through a difficult period, and if I don't seem the happy-go-lucky self, I'm not mad at any of you. I love you all, but my mind's not here. Okay, but I do want to make a comment on this grant writer. I had the experience of the pleasure of meeting a grant writer in Norfolk that doesn't work for the school division. He actually worked for the Education Foundation, and I can see this is a great opportunity for us to partner with the Education Foundation. And the beauty of the situation in Norfolk is that that individual knows his salary, his well-being is depending on how well he writes those grants, because out of those grants come his salary. So he is motivated. It's not like a traffic cop that he get paid whether you write tickets or not. In his case, he had to be productive. So I'm just sharing that because this could lead into a interesting dialogue with the Spotsylvania Education Foundation, and half and half, three-quarter, or what have you. I think it's worth the dialogue.
Thank you.
That was a consideration as well, Mr. Lohr. So I think that's a good observation, and we do want to make sure that our foundation is able to provide grants that go directly to students. And one of the things that I know that Ms. Daniels has done quite a bit of in the last couple of years is to try to help connect businesses to the foundation, and I think this would be another way to do that. So not only would it bring additional grant money to the school division directly, but also grants that are already in place and established that they've had a hard time funding over the last several years when the economy went south. So I do think that's another important possibility.
Ms. Gaines?
Okay. The next few items that you'll see in administration, these items are basically reallocations and also some savings that was identified by the Human Resources Department in terms of fingerprinting. Versus paying $44 for a volunteer to be fingerprinted, Mrs. Colbert and her team identified a vendor where they can pay more like $17. The other piece is just a reallocation of the Director of Strategic Planning from instruction to admin to address accountability matters that are increasing greatly. For every area, when we went through, if we saw a one-time cost, that $3710 primarily is materials and supplies, we made that reduction. And then you see the $5,000 increase in that particular line to assist the superintendent as he moves forward with the implementation of his vision. Any questions on those?
Any questions? Continue.
Okay, the next item, transportation, when you're looking at maintenance, and also when you go on to page 26, food services, I'll turn it over to Mr. Upperco.
Thank you once again, Madam Chairman, members of the board, colleagues of Dr. Baker, excuse me, didn't mean to leave you out there. I'd like to go over the recommendations in the area of transportation, and as I do so, I'd like to just say quite bluntly that we are at a point where we simply have to make some improvements in order to be able to deliver our children on a daily basis in the manner that we wish to do so. As you can see, 212,000, almost 213,000 of the increase is due to the 3% COLA. I'd like to address, or actually re-emphasize what Mrs. Gaines has already mentioned, the increase of $133,374 to increase the bus aid hourly pay from $817 to $950. This is necessary to attract personnel to our district. Many of our bus aides, if not a great majority, are mandated by students' IEPs, special education students' individual education plans. They are not an option. If we do not have them when they're mandated in the IEP, then we are technically out of compliance as a school division, and we certainly don't want to do that. So that is the rationale for that additional cost on an hourly basis. There's something I want to address very quickly here. The increase in the transportation hotline hourly rate, it's a relatively small increase, but the point of the hotline itself is tied to the strategic plan and the desire to improve customer satisfaction. The hotline is a means to have parents to contact transportation, especially at the outset of the year, wanting to know bus routes, stops, etc. It proved to be successful this year. We need to continue that, and as I said, it is part of our strategic plan. So despite the relatively small amount of increase, I wanted to be able to articulate that to you today. And I'm not going to hit every line, if you don't mind. I'm going to hit what I consider to be the big ones so that you'll have an idea of where we're going. As you can see, 216,000, almost 217,000, we're recommending for 10 additional bus driver positions, and almost $86,000 for 5 additional bus aid positions. This is strictly to meet demand, if you will. The fiscal year 2016 recommended budget includes these because we need them, frankly. And I will probably be here next year at the same time asking for some additional to the additional, because we are at that point. Madam Chair, I don't know if you want me to go through the different hourly contracts that we offer our bus drivers at this point, since that was in the informational memo, or not. I'll be happy to do so if you'd like me to.
Does anybody require that information? No. No, don't. Keep going. You're
Okay.
good.
Currently, we have 54 special ed buses on the road. We need to add more, but we don't have the drivers at present to do so. Each of these buses also requires an attendant. We also have 17 Head Start or VPI buses and 3 regional alternative buses that also require attendants. A total of 74 of our buses require attendance, and we have a total of 66 contracts available which includes all of our options, so to speak, 4-hour, 5-hour, and Head Start contracts. Additional drivers and attendants are needed because of the influx of special education students that require transportation. Some of these are pre-K, as we mentioned the increase when Mrs. Richardson was talking about the early childhood education students. They still need transportation, and so some of our increase has come in this population. Last year at this time, we transported approximately 511 special education students. We are now transporting 723. And when I say we're transporting that many special education students, I mean we are transporting them with special needs buses. We have many, many special education students that don't require special transportation, but those numbers are those that require special transportation. I was waiting for a question, but it sounds good, so I'll keep on going if that's all right. Okay, yes, sir.
As I'm leaving the house just a little while ago, I picked up Time magazine. On the cover, the headline is, gasoline, how low is it going to go and how long is going to stay low? I'm looking forward to reading that article. With the bottom, I notice here, a decrease in gasoline account. We really don't know how low this is going to go, and we really don't know how long it's going to stay low. And that is a concern, because as you know, in the world that we live in, all it takes is one crisis somewhere in the world, and gasoline will go right through the roof, and then we have a crisis internally. So I will be very careful with that line. My instinct tells me that for my family budget, I'm leaving it as it is, and then if it stays down, then I have some extra funds for other things. If it goes up a little bit, I can deal with it, but if I lower it and then the gasoline prices go up, then I'm in trouble.
That's a perfect segue, because the next thing I wanted to address was the fuel decrease in our budget, and the rationale and some other things that I think may help to shed some light on that. And of course, we just had a very important leader in Saudi Arabia to pass away, and that leads to some uncertainty. And you're right, that's the kind of world that we live in. What happens in Saudi Arabia could affect us tomorrow. I would like to address the $200,000 decrease. It is a decrease in fuel because of our fuel costs being lower. Compared to last year, however, our fuel usage is actually up about 8%. And that's due to the same issues that we've already addressed, the additional special education students and the shortage of drivers that require our existing drivers to sometimes deadhead. In other words, they're in essence traveling from one place to another without any students in order to pick those other students up. We try not to do that if we can help it, obviously. The current price of diesel is down considerably. The average price for diesel in fiscal year 2014 was $3.15 a gallon. Our average this year to date is $2.66 a gallon. And it could be, if we go by what we're doing today, it's going to be even less. But can we go by what we're doing today? At our current situation remains as it is, our cost could go down even further. I really don't want to give you the number because I don't want to be held accountable for it, because I can't predict the future. If the short-term fuel forecast, however, holds true, $1.5 million, we believe, will fund our fuel for fiscal year 16. If we allow a 20% for volatility, then $1.8 million, we believe, should be adequate, which gives us a little bit of extra that we can transfer to our maintenance department, which has some specific needs there. But you're right. It's important to keep in mind these prices are very, very volatile. A 1 cent increase in fuel prices translates for us into about a $7,000 annual cost. So for every 1 cent, $7,000. Prices, as you know, may increase. You mentioned the possibility of whatever, anywhere in the world could affect that. So we are prudent, I think, in this recommendation, but we're constantly monitoring the world situation and the price of gas. We're fortunate Mr. Schaefer and Mr. Greenlaw do a great job of getting us in cheap fuel in some contracting that they're able to do. We don't pay nearly what you pay at the gas tank because of that, what you not pay.
Mr. Braswell?
Mr. Uppercoat, this is not necessarily a question, it was somewhat of a comment. Dr. Baker and his team has discussed the possibility of having international baccalaureate at Spotsylvania High School, which is going to require, at least it's implied in the planning, that there's going to require some transportation that's a little bit different than what we're accustomed to. And so the question I have is based off of what we have here right now in terms of vehicles that are either on hand or scheduled to be purchased, do we have the flexibility to accomplish that form of transportation for the International Baccalaureate?
We do now, and then we've even thought about in the future, if we were to have magnet school concepts at other high schools, like a STEM academy or that kind of thing, what would the long-range implications be? We believe that we can meet those needs, but it will take some creativity. As you know now, we transport students from every high school over to the Career and Technical Education Center. That has worked fairly well. We think it's doable, but it's going to require all of us getting together, annually and deciding what is feasible and what is not feasible. But in the short term, it's definitely feasible as far as the IB specific program at Spotsylvania High School.
And I know that the principal at Spotsylvania High School has done some planning with transportation to begin looking at it. It is not reflected in next year's budget because it would not be implemented next year. However, we are going to have to include something in there next year. But as the program builds, that may be something that's somewhat in flux. But I think it's a good observation that we have to begin to assume that that's going to impact us.
Any more questions?
I have one, but it's for Mrs. Gaines when you're done with this one.
Okay. Mr. Uppercoat, do you have more?
Yes, I do have
Okay.
more. Well, I didn't know if anybody had another question on that particular item. I'm going to skip down to the fleet service vehicle, which actually would be funded through fleet service. Currently, Fleet Services has 4 road service response trucks. The average age of these trucks is 18 years old. One unit is a 1992 model. It's got 207,000 miles on it, and a replacement truck is needed to maintain response reliability and safe, efficient operation. A newer model truck would also be more cost-effective to operate from a gas mileage standpoint. Mr. Greenlaw ensures that we follow a very strict criteria for purchasing new or replacement vehicles. One of the mandates of that is that a vehicle should be 7 years old or older before a new one is purchased. And he is here if you have specific questions about what some of those other mandates might be. Okay. If you don't mind, we'll go down to the maintenance category. And the first thing I'd like to address, is an adjustment or $200,000 that we saved in fuel from transportation would transfer to our maintenance department. We would increase the maintenance, repair, and supply lines with that money. These lines cover a variety of parts and supplies for the department, and they're included in the operating budget rather than the capital budget. A lot of people say, well, you just got all this bond money, how come you can't tap some of that for these increases? And the reason is because they're recurring. They don't meet the definition of a capital expense. So consequently, they have to come from the operating budget. Maintenance in the past the repair and supply lines have been underfunded, but in the past, the division's been able to pull savings from the area of electricity to offset the deficits in the supply lines and in the repair lines. However, we have been notified that electricity rates are slated to increase by about 8% in the coming year. Actually, in the spring of 2015, maintenance would no longer be able to transfer funding from that source as it had previously. Consequently, with our buildings aging, we have a need to transfer the $200,000 into those accounts. In addition, the department has incurred an increase in custodial supply fees over the past few years, and this is primarily due to the implementation of additional and alternative cleaning procedures to combat health challenges such as Ebola, pandemic flu, flu strains that have become resistant to some of the previously used disinfectants and products. These changes are essential to ensure that safety and good health for students and staff is maintained. So again, thanks to the savings, even short-term savings, if you will, in transportation fuel costs, we will be able to transfer those $200,000 to the maintenance department where it's sorely needed now. Any questions?
Ms. Gaines?
For the sake of time, previously I did review with you food service, that big ticket item, and the fact that it only relates to budget authority. At this time, if I can turn it over to Ms. Flanard, and she'll walk you through the technology requests.
Maybe. Okay, it finally lit up. Good evening again. The first two line items are the usual and customary that has been addressed by the other areas. The 75,000 FTE for the data systems position. This is an analytical position. It's a data analyst position, and that position really is very much needed, not just for the typical federal and state requirements that are, Dr. Baker alluded to on the mandates that are coming down, but also to provide data at the division level, at the school level, during PLCs, and at the teacher level, so that they can actually do direct instruction based on real-time data that we are collecting. Many of you are aware of some of the increased of robust testing that we have allowed our students to participate to, so that we can better drive our instruction, such as scholastic math inventory or scholastic reading inventory, as well as Fountas and Pinnell. We're getting better data, which is fantastic, but we need it to be accessible to drive our instruction. And so we need an individual that will help us in the area of instructional technology to better serve our students and align our instruction to their student learning needs. In the area of the non-compensation lines, you can see all of the items there. The Synergy maintenance fee of $122,000 is the annual maintenance fee for Synergy. LMS stands for Learning Management System, better known as SCORE. That is at the annual cost of $50,000. Our technical maintenance contracts, our contracts tend to go up every year, and this year, adding them all together, it's going up by $30,000. School wires, Dr. Baker alluded to this earlier. We have a reduction in E-rate funds, and so our local has to compensate for that, which is $22,520 for school wires.
Can you give us a 10-second update on, are we ready on our student information system?
I'll be happy to. Thank you. Our student information system, we are working on our very last data exchange, and we are looking for that very exciting rollout to be on February 16th. So I definitely realistic that there's going to be a bump, but I believe that we are doing everything that we can to make sure that there are very little and minor bumps. And I just got an update before this meeting, and we are on track so that we can have a very smooth and successful rollout. So we are thrilled to see what Synergy brings for us.
Thank you for the good news.
Okay, any comments, any more questions? Mr. Blaine?
A couple of comments. I'm not sure that they're questions at all. I'm concerned with the access to the internet throughout the division and the rural areas especially, and I don't know that we're doing anything about that, and if there's anything to be done, but it is a concern. And as we move from books to internet access to do everything, it's a real hassle, I'm sure, for those families that don't have access. Is there a response to that concern at all, do you think, or?
I think that one of the things that we are doing to try to support that is making sure that our access within our schools is the best that it could possibly be. We certainly do not have control over the outside environment within our school system, but we certainly are trying to do a better and more robust technology program in regards to access to what our students have, and we are piloting at two of our high schools particularly. One of them is Spotsy High on purpose, on bringing their devices to school and seeing what that response looks like at Spotsy High so that we can see how many of our students have access outside of school. And we purposely chose two different ends of the county so that we can get better answers to exactly what you're getting at.
Good. Thank you for that. And Mrs. Gaines, I had an observation of one of the things that bothers me, and I don't know if there's a dollar value on here. And this is the problem that I see we encounter in terms of efficiencies with categorical funding. And I don't know that you can have a dollar number that you can put on there. It'd probably be very difficult, but it causes us extra work. And I don't know what we can do about it, other with maybe we should make a formal request to change this. Do you have any observations that you're comfortable with speaking about now?
Yes. Where we are currently, I did go back and run some numbers. For FY13, FY14, it's going to actually depend, Mr. Blaine, in terms of where we are, what happens when you're going through your budget based on the budget assumptions. It varies in terms of what the cost is. When I did some analysis for FY13, I want to say that particular year we had almost 13 to 20 amendments. The associated cost was about $20-something thousand, so it will vary. So far this year, we have not had any, but I do know that I will have one coming up probably in the April timeframe, but I'll continue to look at that and monitor that.
And if it were not for categorical funding, you could internally make a lot of these decisions, and it would be done, and we'd be able to move forward without any time delay. Is that accurate?
It is true that being categorically funded, it does add 4 steps to the process, but all transactions, if we're going to move by category, does come through the school board, so I appreciate that support.
Thank you.
Ms. Gaines?
Okay, by way of wrapping up the presentation tonight, we do have 2 additional items. One, just to say what are the budget unknowns. Right now, we're still early on in the process at the state level. They are scheduled to have crossover come February the 10th, adopt their budget somewhere March, April timeframe. Again, the county administrator will be presenting February 10th, with the supervisors approving April 14th. At the federal level, maybe our projections can be modified. We'll continue to look at those on a weekly basis. Again, we are going through negotiations with our health contractor to determine what those final rates will be, and then also getting the final VRS rate. In terms of next steps, we do have another work session scheduled for next Monday, February the 2nd at 5:30, and the school board is scheduled to approve its budget on February the 9th. So in essence today, are there any additional questions, comments that you want us to research, that you want us to cost out, so we can be prepared when we come back before you on February 2nd?
Madam Chair, I just want to say thanks to the finance staff and Dr. Baker for preparing the Q&As, on short notice, and it helped us because I read through, the information before coming here, and I think it was very helpful. It was also helpful to be able to have the dialogue this evening to go over some of the questions and ask, particular questions. So thanks to the staff for the preparation.
For the next session, could you prepare for us the cost savings of between a 2% COLA and a 3% COLA?
Any other questions? Okay, Dr. Baker, you have some closing comments?
No.
The
Thank
time
you.
is up.
Okay, and I just want to as well say thank you for preparing all of this for us this evening. And do I have a motion to adjourn?
Motion to adjourn.
Dr. Meyer, second from Ms. Graham. All in favor? Aye. Aye, 6-0 with Mrs. Blaylock absent. Thank you.